All right, welcome all of you happily, you joyously, miserable, accursed. The show you're about to hear is a live podcast taping of our Toronto Region Board of Trade event, held just last night at the Arcadian Loft at Bay and Queen. If I'm doing the math right, this is the 19th episode of our Curse of Politics Ontario Election Daily Pods. This one, as I said, held in front of a live audience, so the energy's a bit different. And so is my earthy, leathery musk, having just had my first hot shower in 5.5 days due to a power outage at the Air Quotes Media Worldwide headquarters in Denholm, Quebec. Jenni, Scott, and I are breaking down the latest from each of the campaigns. Except, fair warning, we're doing it with drinks in our hands, so please try to ignore two things: the clinking of ice in our glasses and the slight increase in profanity as we put the cuss in discuss. Pretty amazing, hey?
Yes.
Yeah? First of all, we haven't seen each other in a hell of a long time until we met at Highs just a couple of hours ago. So
That's right.
It was a pre-meet. It was a pre-meet, not a pre-drink, a pre-meet.
Everyone's here having a drink at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Or as we call that, a late start.
It's funny to have speak in front of a crowd like this, because really what the podcast is just the three of us sitting around as if we were in a bar or in a coffee shop talking about politics. And we'd all come in, and the Habs and other things in life.
And Harry Styles.
And normally when we do that, people move away from us in the bar or the coffee shop. So to have people actually coming to the event is a little shocking, and I'm not sure we know what to do up here to entertain you. But We'll get into it. We'd like to tell you that this is like a really tight, close race, that there's like some key decisions in the last week. They're going to determine everything. But the entire Ford campaign team is here.
Right there. And they're all wearing Team Jenni t-shirts.
You're wearing Team Jenni t-shirts, so... Scott and I have been scouring the room for Don Guy. We do not see him anywhere. So, and that indicates, I think, a level of reality about the election, that as we head into the last week, there seems to be a pretty settled and solid trajectory, which is that the Conservatives in vote intention are in the high 30s, and the Liberals are in the mid-20s to high 20s, and the NDP are in the low 20s to mid-20s. And all that adds up to a Conservative majority government, and those voting patterns have been stable through the entire writ period of this election campaign. Those fundamental dynamics have not shifted. And as we've discussed on the pod before, I know none of you listened, but as we've discussed on the pod before, Ford's lead is probably bigger than it appears, because he's very strong among older voters and likely is to have a better turnout than the other parties. So I thought we'd start tonight by just talking about how it is we got into this situation, because it wasn't always a predictable situation. There were definitely times in the last 4 years when it looked like Doug Ford could easily lose an election. In fact, there were times when it looked like it might be difficult for him to win an election. And so the fact that he's cruising confidently toward re-election is an interesting phenomenon. And I think we're all going to talk about it. I'm going to start by putting my proposition on the table. I think, first of all, it's not unreasonable to say that COVID saved Doug Ford. I think because it injected a completely external event into his government that totally changed the way governments were being perceived by their populations, and gave him an agenda that was roughly consonant with what the public wanted his agenda to be, which had not been the case in the first year of his government. So, I mean, he was, before COVID, in a really bad place with Ontarians, and COVID came along and allowed him to find a different footing. In the last year, some of them are here. I'm not going to mention anybody by name, but he's brought in professional management of the government and the campaign and the whole thing.
And also Corey.
And also Corey. And they found two things. They found a message that would animate enough people to elect them, which is the vote yes, vote development, build things, let's get this province going forward. And they found ways to get everybody else not to care as much whether he continued on as premier. So they scraped the edges off the opposition so that among the people that don't want him to be premier, there aren't enough who really care strongly about that in order to shape their vote decision, strategically vote, cast aside. And I think in the face of that, the opposition parties almost have to conclude they decided to run for second, both of them. And they have concentrated most of their campaigns on appealing to the same group of voters as the other one and to trying to outbid the other one for the support of those voters. And the result is that they're splitting that. Nobody's won that contest. The other consequence of that is nobody has even really tried to lay a glove on Doug Ford. There has not been any concerted negative attack on Doug Ford, either through advertising, paid media, or through leaders' tours and earned media. To the extent that they've been rough with each other, the NDP and the Liberals, more than they've been rough with Ford. And so there has been nothing to put the Conservatives off their game, nothing to change the message they would have on any given day. And so that's how I think we got here today. That would be my overall take. Jenni, what do you think?
Yeah, no, there is most I agree with you in terms of where we are today. I do think that Doug completely, during COVID, he absolutely appealed to a extreme broad sense of the population. I know you started calling him Doug, Scott.
Yes, I did. I call him Dee is actually my name for him.
You're on a first name basis with two people in that government, Doug and Peter.
And Peter Buffalo.
Excuse me, Bethan Falvey. So no, I agree with that. I also think we're in the position. Listen, I and I'm not saying this because I have friends wearing T-shirts with my names on them in the front row. I think that the Conservative candidate campaign has run a very strong campaign, a very disciplined campaign. Discipline is the number one thing that you want in an election campaign. It is something that people do not think about in terms of how you think. They think exciting. You think contrast ads. You think negative. But discipline is very hard. We know how hard it is to be disciplined, especially if you're.
Ray Khan in that deep tissue massage he gave Doug Ford in the Star yesterday was referring to that discipline and how the fact that he wouldn't even take the bait from Del Duca. Del Duca say terrible things about him and he would just.
But discipline is very hard to do. Like it's like, think about when anyone here, if you guys are being attacked on Twitter for something that you've said, it's very hard to not engage into a fight on Twitter. So to be disciplined in terms of a campaign is almost the hardest thing to do. And so Doug in the Conservative campaign has been very disciplined. And then you've also had, David, to your point of this, a very discombobulated both NDP and Liberal campaign. So at the start of this campaign, we talked about that if Stephen Del Duca wanted to make any major inroads, he was going to have to bring the Del Duca brand at least competitive with the Liberal Party of Canada brand. Because the Liberal Party of Canada brand, you Liberals in the room, you're really fucking lucky that you have one of the most salient, strong brands in the entire Western world, the Liberal Party of Canada, ergo the Liberal Party of Ontario. So he had to kind of try to aspire to that, and there's been no evidence that that is the case. And they decided to run a very leader-centric campaign, which has turned out to be a mistake for them. And so I think we find ourselves where we're at based on campaign decisions that different war rooms have made. And we've all been in war rooms where we made right decisions, and we've been in war rooms that have made wrong decisions. And I think that at the end of the day, we're in a position where we have the Ford campaign that has made a lot of right decisions. We've had a Del Duca campaign that has made, I think, wrong decisions in terms of a strategic overview. And I think you have an NDP campaign that is making almost no decisions in terms of where what they're actually in terms of.
I reckon that whether you're a Hurley-Burleyite, a member of the accursed, or both, you are in an unusually close relationship with your smartphone. I'd go further and bet that at least 50% of our listenership has a couple of phones. I don't judge. However, access to a smartphone and a data plan is not so easy or affordable for all Canadians. And it's a critical aspect of the digital divide our presenting sponsor, TELUS, is working so hard to bridge. TELUS Mobility for Good started in 2017, offering free or heavily discounted smartphones and rate plans to youth transitioning from foster care, so they could stay connected to their support networks and take advantage of other opportunities for the next stage of life. Since those early days, the program's been expanded to offer free or subsidized phones and data plans to low-income seniors and other marginalized Canadians who need the support a Lifeline brings. 13,000 people to date have been able to take advantage of the program, with 7,000 added in just this last year alone. TELUS's goal? To more than double that number to 30,000 by 2025. They'll get there too. How do I know? Because it's part of TELUS's many ESG commitments, environmental, social, and governance. They measure those commitments, publicly report on those commitments, and take action to get them done. You can read more about all of it in their sustainability and ESG report at telus.com/sustainability. You know, one of the things that's perplexed me, Jenny, is why did the Liberals and the NDP think the best way to win the Progressive primary was to fight each other, as opposed to show the voters that they were both trying to appeal to, that they were the strongest anti-Ford voice?
But they weren't fighting each other. Up until last week, they weren't fighting each other.
I think they mostly have been.
Mostly.
Right?
I don't think so.
Fight for first and fall to second.
No,
Don't
fighting
fight
for
for
first.
second.
Fighting
That's
for
always
first.
my-
Fighting for first, though, is going against the Tories. So
That's what I mean. Fight for
No.
first and fall to second. Don't fight for second. And they made the mistake of fighting for second, both of them, I think.
yeah, and deem themselves irrelevant. We've seen that probably both war rooms went off this past long weekend, and sat and went riding painstakingly, riding by riding as to which ridings we were going to win. Which is why the top secret leaked memo by the Liberal campaign basically said that they sat down there and they looked at the ridings that they can pick up, and they are predominantly, if not all, in the NDP category, which is why they're throwing out the, if you want to stop a potential Doug Ford majority, you've got to vote for us because the NDP have no chance. And so, you know, there are ways that war rooms, when they're planning this stuff, can actually try to do two prongs, and neither campaign seem to actually it's a reality. They are actually fucking fighting themselves on a lot of the ridings. So they can say they can say they're running against Doug Ford in Toronto Centre, but they're not running against Doug Ford in Toronto Centre.
I believe that they would have been better off.
You seem to not want to let Scott talk.
I don't really want to let Scott talk. We were at highs.
Same.
We were at highs. He refused to eat. You were begging him to eat.
I had a
something. He wouldn't eat.
I had a nosebleed.
He did.
a really bad
nosebleed.
nosebleed, and I think
And
David's
so
afraid that if
I don't want Scott to talk. I personally believe that either one of them would have been better off, rather than trying to convince people that one had the better parental leave plan than the other one, to convince people that they had the better anti-Ford diagnosis than the other one, that they were the true fighters against the Ford government. Fighters, you go. Come on, what do you think?
Well, I think the knock on David Herle is that he'd rather fight than fuck, and that's always been
Certainly since
what
I'm-
takes
certainly
you to
since
this
I'm 40.
position. No, look, I want to start. Okay, welcome.
You really should have.
Welcome to the Blue Room, everybody. My name's Don Rickles. Red Fox is next to me.
You really should have had a beef slider at highs.
There we should, yeah. I want to start by acknowledging the fact that Corey Tenak, the campaign manager for Ford, is in the room. I do want to name names. And Corey, I want to say to you that my mother called me 2 days ago and said, "Are you still friends with that Corey guy?" And I said, "Yes." And she says, "Will you tell him that I am so mad at him? How can people be so goddamn stupid to vote for that Ford guy?" And so she's very wound up about the discipline of the campaign. She's very, very upset that COVID isn't a prominent issue in the campaign.
What is Corey supposed to do with that feedback, by the way?
He's not. Not go to my mom's house for lunch, I think, would be the number one thing I would avoid. But I think that, how do we get here? My mother has that diagnosis. It's Corey's fault. That may well be true. I think two things. One thing that happened and one thing that didn't happen. The thing that happened is the thing you talked about, David, already, which is that Ford transformed his relationship with Ontario during COVID. And more than anything else, he established himself as well-intended. And I just don't think in a day and age when people don't pay close attention to the particulars of policy, don't pay close attention to the particulars of politics, they do. And people withdraw sort of osmotically an impression of their leaders. And I think that, there were stumbles, obviously, playgrounds and all that stuff. But I think that by and large, the impression that people withdrew for Ford, at least a plurality, if not a majority of voters, was I can't blame them for what's occurred and probably give them an even bigger discount than deserved on that. So I'm not going to blame them for this, but I am going to reward him for being well-intended. And as a guy who's a populist, who's premier, yes, who wants to say, yep, we get along, hey, folks, hey, my friends, he put himself in a position where suddenly folks said, oh, he's well-intended. The first year of his government, it didn't make any sense to people. The things they were doing, the way they were behaving, did not feel like he was well-intended. COVID suddenly left people with the impression that it was the public interest. Sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong, but he was always trying and he was well-intended and properly motivated. I think the thing that didn't happen is I would scroll back like a year ago, and I don't think that the Liberals decided, I'm going to particularly concentrate on the Liberals, I don't think that they made...
Even though you're our official NDP spokesman.
Even though I'm the New Democrat on the panel. Thanks, brothers and sisters, for being here. And we'll see you back at the hall. But I think that the Liberals failed to make, they said we are going to audition, and Del Duca decided they were going to audition for government. So they spent a year not critiquing Ford, not building any connective tissue between the things that didn't work during COVID and the things that people were anxious about going forward, and saying, here's the reason you can't trust this guy to manage the thing that's coming, not the thing that's past. And they didn't go negative, to your point, David, and they didn't establish Del Duca as a personality. So now we find out that Del Duca, even among Liberals, isn't actually necessarily a lock as best choice for premier. People either don't know him or they're not blown away by him. And there's no case against Ford. And I hate to say it, people don't like to hear this, but they should have gone negative. So the thing that did happen is that Ford reestablished his relationship with Ontario voters, and then the campaign and a bunch of decisions that folks like pricks like Corey have made have reinforced all of that in a very strong, built massive shielding, hard to penetrate way. And the Del Duca campaign didn't mount any kind of negative case for change, and inexplicably also didn't establish him as a personality. And so now we're ended up in a world going, well, as you say, who gives a shit what his parental leave policy is? Why is he talking about climate change? What is this? What's the connection to something that would alter my vote? And that's when you're behind, you have to think, how do I get people to alter their inclination? And that hasn't happened.
But it's not just people, it's Liberal voters. Like, David, we talked about this morning, it's only 51% of Liberal voters are absolutely convinced they're voting for the Liberal Party right now. So we're in the middle of advanced polls.
Yep.
There's 3 more days.
Much softer than the other parties.
49% of traditional Liberal voters do not know or do not...
They'd be interested in more information. They're still interested.
As
Greg Lyle puts it,
I'd like a flyer. I'd like a flyer would be good. Both sides. So I really get the full dose, I can read it.
So we learned, I think we talked about this, we learned in the federal campaign that governments are kind of getting a pass on COVID. And the electorate's reluctant to judge governments on COVID. So no matter what you thought of Ford during COVID, leave it aside. Don't relitigate it.
My mom is wrong, is the point.
Don't relitigate it. But what about the first year? Can't you go back to the first year? Dean French existed, right? And can't you make Ford carry that around a little bit? I just think of something like these mandate letters.
Jesus, you're triggering me, David.
Yeah, I understand. What would, to trigger you some more, what would Pierre Poilievre do to Doug?
Did he tape the locks on the women's washroom and stuff? What was going on behind the scenes? If he was that bad in public,
What would Pierre Poilievre due to Doug Ford in a debate on something like the mandate letters, right? You would press him. You would press him. You would say, well, is this, since you won't tell us what's in it, is this in it? Will you deny that this is in it?
But nobody gives
Right?
a fuck what's in a mandate letter.
Well, no, you can make shit up. You make shit up.
no, but if
You're
you're
supposed to
going to-
bulldoze half of the green belt.
But you're going
Right?
to. But no. But if someone is going to go after Doug, if you're going to spend your time on mandate letters, no one gives a fuck. Ask ask your mom.
No,
Would
no,
she
so you're
know-
misunderstanding me. It's not
Would
about
she
mandate
know
letters.
what a mandate letter is?
She's just gunning for Corey.
No,
Corey.
it's not about mandate letters and the
moved on
process
from
of
Doug.
secrecy. It's about, did you instruct your minister to do this
Right.
when they were sworn in? Did you or did you not?
But what issue is it?
Make anyone
Make
up.
any-
So you're talking about something. So COVID has been the most prolific event of probably most of our lifetimes, which lasted for 1.5 to 2 years. And you're basically saying that what the opposition should do should be to leapfrog
Here's the real
over
Doug
that.
Ford. Here's the guy that when he was, before COVID, everybody gets a pass on COVID. Here's who the guy was.
I think it's pretty slim pickings. At the end
I
of the
can't
day,
argue with you there.
it's slim pickings.
Right?
What, they're going to run a campaign against Dean French?
Well, as a proxy.
The people that would care most about that was anyone that worked at Queen's Park in the first year of the government, not the Ontario voters.
There's similar weird crosstabs on the cross players. I agree with you, David. Not on mandate letters specifically. I don't know. Maybe that's. I mean, but that's an illustration, right? But it goes back to my point about a year ago. I think you needed to establish a year ago a case for change, and you needed to recognize whether you liked it or not, whether you were my mom or not. You needed to recognize. Look, COVID has allowed this guy to reestablish himself as a political personality and define himself in ways that are really pretty concrete. And so I got to disrupt that. I have to change that. And I think, like I would pick on a different spot. I'd be saying, you know what, Doug Ford, throughout COVID, here's 2-3 examples. So I'll just borrow and try to contaminate the COVID experience, but then leap it forward and say, Doug Ford isn't looking out for you. He's looking out for people that can get him on the phone. And there's a handful of people that can get him on the phone, and they get what they want done. And
Nobody said that. You're the first person to say that in this campaign. Del Duque has not said that.
And I don't
Morvat has
understand
not
that.
said that.
I would go at that with an axe, and I would have been going at it a year ago and try to say, because, like, if we want to go back a decade, right? There was a vibe in the city, in the region, about Doug Ford and Rob Ford, and the vibe was, Rob is an adorable fuck up, right? Literally, right? Like, but he's a nice. Doug's the ball breaker. He's the goof. He's the bully, right? He's the bully. All of that COVID evaporated that bully definition, completely evaporated it. And I think you needed to figure out a way to demonstrate, no, he is a bully. He is actually not, it's a phony construction that he's there for the people. He's actually just there for certain people who are pals of his. Here's the evidence of it, and I'm going to drill in it. And they needed 2 scandals in the past 12 months that either they manufactured and defined, right? Or they found and they exploited. But they needed something like that. They literally needed to do the hard work of opposition, which is, let's build a scandal, put bruises on this guy before he gets in the campaign.
But in
it's too late now. 10
No, but in
days
terms of talking
8
about how
days?
Doug handled
8 days.
COVID, listen.
You should be on top of that.
There were things about COVID that I disagreed with the government, as my friends in the first row will know, because I would call and tell them I disagreed. But at the end of the day, Doug was anything but partisan or anything about his friends. So he was there was no premier that actually hugged.
I think you can make the case.
Hugged the prime minister more than what.
It's like the
than what
mandate
Doug
letters,
did.
Jenny. It's the things we don't know about.
That sounds like a conspiracy theory, and we wouldn't want to peddle in those, Scott.
No. Sorry, Dr.
Yeah.
Lewis.
Yeah.
So I think that's unfair. Like, Doug was actually the most transparent in terms of who he was working with. Who's that other guy? The Joe Volpe's son that is a big liberal that you guys are friends with. What's his
Flavio.
name?
Unless you're talking about Flavio. Are you talking about Flavio or a friend of
Flavio.
mine?
Flavio.
Oh, sorry.
Flavio.
You think the Liberals should run against Flavio Volpe?
Yeah.
Think
No, but I'm saying that he's a liberal, is he not?
Yeah, I guess. I don't
Okay.
know. I don't know if he is.
And Doug
I mean,
and Doug
people think
held
that 'cause
how
of his
many?
dad.
And Doug did initiatives with him. So to say that Doug was using COVID to like help his friends and what have you.
I go to the board to long-term care. I go to the passing the law on long-term care. They peddled this stuff out on the campaign trail, the Liberals and the NDP, in the last 24 hours, but they did it kind of, limp-dicked and, late. So, like, it doesn't work. You got to establish this stuff before the campaign starts, Like, these are all bullets just bouncing off the campaign's chest.
Solve the housing crisis by building more affordable homes. But not in my backyard. This is the mantra of a small but vocal group of Ontario residents, including municipal councillors and groups, that are more concerned about protecting the appearance of their neighbourhoods than they are about ensuring all Ontarians have a fair shot at home ownership. Our original sponsor, the Ontario Real Estate Association, says NIMBYers, or not in my backyarders, are standing between the dream of home ownership and Ontario families. There are solutions that can help solve this crisis, but we need everybody on board. Outdated zoning laws only encourage NIMBY forces to fight the building of affordable homes and keep them out of growing neighborhoods. The result? More and more Ontarians have no shot at owning a home in the community they grew up in. Ontario needs to use the Planning Act to implement as-of-right zoning, beginning in urban municipalities, to create equality when it comes to home ownership and bringing down the cost of living. 40% of Ontarians believe that zoning restrictions in municipalities is the main reason why not enough homes are being built to sustain our current population. In 1 week, Ontarians go to the polls to elect the next provincial government. The housing affordability crisis needs to be at the top of the agenda when MPPs come back to Queen's Park, or else the dream of home ownership could disappear for an entire generation. You'll be hearing more from Maria about Ontario's housing affordability crisis and what can be done to fix it, because Aurea believes that reforming exclusionary zoning practices will have a big effect in ensuring we have a home for everyone. Read Aurea's plan at ahomeforeveryone.info. All right, let's move on.
From the Ontario election.
Yeah.
All right.
Music
Excellent.
now.
Right
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk Beach Boys. Let's
So,
go back
Jenny-
to where Lindsay was.
There's 8 days to go.
Yep.
You have been, as near as I can tell, in the nerve center of 6 general election campaigns, federal and provincial.
Yes.
And
Nerve center.
nerve center. I use that to
Neurons
distinguish her
firing.
from you. Okay?
Right.
Yeah. So, what is it like to be in charge of the campaign with 8 days to go?
It depends. There's kind of 3, but there's 3, but I'd say really 2 major ones. You're either in charge where it looks like you're going to win.
I've heard that.
And
Sure thing. It's a lot. Take it for granted.
and what you want
Sugar nut.
is you want the campaign to fucking end tomorrow. The clock, if there's a clock, it's going like tick, tick, tick. And those are actually worse than the campaigns. You just want it to end. Every little thing you're worried about is going to cause a story. You know things are going well. You're looking at your voter ID numbers coming in. The polling is good. Your opponents haven't been able to land a blow, so things are going well. So those are actually almost most painful for a campaign than what when you're fighting for one, whether you think you're about to win or you're losing. So like for the 2015 campaign, for example, those of us that were on the campaign, we knew a fair bit out that like it was not looking like it went from, we were in a majority to a minority to losing a minority to like a Liberal majority. And when you're into the last kind of week and a half of that, and I assume this is where the Liberals and the NDP are at right now, is you're actually just begging for more time, because what you've kind of forgot about is what's happening at the national level. So you're the central level. You are now doing what I think the Liberals did, is you're going seat by seat by seat, and you want the extra time because you think, oh, if I can just get 50 more fucking votes in Davenport, or 50 more
If I could just have 5 more days
If I
like the
could-
last 5 days.
if it's going to come down to 200 votes, if I just have that little bit of time, I can do it. And so there's stress levels that are different, like that are very, very different. But they're both very tough. And then you can be in a position where you've won, and you're doing well, and you're kind of you're cruising, but you're still hoping nothing bad happens. But it's a pretty good feeling.
In a Jenni Byrne campaign, how many people are left in headquarters right now?
It's dwindled already. This is when you start to like push people out into into the riding. So you're in. It's a little bit different provincially.
Explain that, because I don't know the people who listen to the pod necessarily know that, right? Like how a campaign headquarters.
So once you start, so you can vote almost on any day of an election, but advanced polls are like the big thing. So for Ontario though, it's different. It's 10 days of advanced polls this time, and so this is the longest bit of advanced polls.
And more people are voting in advanced polls than used to, right?
I'm looking over. Yes. No.
Okay.
Really?
Not thanks to those Dominion voting machines.
But when you have once you start getting the vote out, you're starting pushing people out. So and it starts with different people in communications and what have you, because your focus becomes on.
No. Those are the last soldiers. You don't want to put those people out in front. I mean, you got to keep the comms people inside, right? They're pure gold, those people. They're valuable.
You know how Reid hates to knock on the door, eh? Don't make him knock on the door. Don't send him out of headquarters.
I don't want to hold your baby while you go get your voting slip.
Someone actually asked us on Twitter if there would ever be an instant that we would ever work on a campaign together, and I think Scott said if Cole Caulfield was working on or running for a mayor of somewhere.
If he wants Napanee, we will be there for him.
We will be there for him. Or Gordon Lightfoot. God love Gordon Lightfoot.
Oh, yeah,
we'd be there for him as well. But you're starting to pull out by the last 2 days of. By the last 2 days in a war room, you are skeleton staff. You've got a couple people in the comms war room. You've got some org people. You've got your lawyer that's brought in doing Elections Canada, Elections Ontario stuff. But everyone else is out in the field.
Designated survivors, basically.
Yeah. Well, it is a skeleton staff.
Tell us about the last week of 2004.
2004. Wow. Glad you changed the question, because I was afraid you were going to ask me what's it like to be in charge of a campaign with 8 days to go, and the only thing I've ever been in charge of with 8 days to go is the bar stool and the dartboard. But
but you were on the plane for a great last week.
I don't want to tell you about the last week. I'll tell you instead about the last 2.5 weeks, because there was a midpoint in the 2004
just really
election.
fit the narrative, but knock yourself out.
I'm just telling you, because at the midpoint of the 2004 election, we were a government that had been elected since 1993. It was whatever it had been, 11 years. We had started out ahead, and we had dropped to 7 points maybe behind, right? And we landed in Newfoundland, and we had to do a switch over of planes. So we moved from a campaign plane to a government plane because the Prime Minister had to go off to, I think it was the anniversary D-Day actually, to France. So he had to go to for 2 days of ceremonies, interrupt the campaign to go off over there. And a bunch of us just stayed on the campaign, and we flew back on the campaign plane. And until then, the pure adrenaline of trying to fight the campaign, get through every day, all of that had kept me going. But without the Prime Minister there, sitting in the seat in front of me and Feschuk, while we would write and rewrite notes and drink beer and have him yell at us, without any of that stimulus, I was left on that plane for 3.5 hours, and I had a nervous breakdown because I was we're flying back into death, right? Campaigns don't go down and then back up, right? So the last week of the campaign, things had turned around. By the last week of the campaign, we were back and we were on the march. And we knew, based on our numbers, your numbers that you were producing, that we were gaining nightly. And we were particularly starting to chew up blue dots like Pac-Man in Ontario. And we realized that we had a real shot. So one of the things about the last week of a campaign is a sickening feeling where you wish there was 2 weeks left in the campaign. Because in 2004, the worst thing about it was that it ended. In 2004, we were gaining day by day. We were picking up ground. And the beautiful thing about it was the electorate was at a position where, as a longtime incumbent, they did not want to reward us. So knowledge that we were winning would result in vote dropping. But as long as we were under the radar, people were happy to vote for us. And we saw, and so there was this notion that we were in trouble. And you had Ipsos saying, oh, the Liberals are toast, it's over. And it was all fantastic air cover for us. And if we had so how was the last week? What was the last week like? Too fucking short is the answer.
Right.
If the last week had been 11 days and not the typical God created Earth 7 days, it would have been perfect. Yeah. We would have won a majority. And we sort of, as history shows, we needed that majority. So.
Yeah, it's true. So what were you doing? You're on the plane, you're writing speeches for the Prime Minister?
At that point, yeah. I mean, I had two responsibilities fundamentally. Feschuk and I are sort of herding over the message. And so we're writing remarks and rewriting remarks for the PM. You're inserting paragraphs. That's what that job is at that point, right? It's persuading the Prime Minister not try to rewrite the entire speech. You don't want to rewrite the entire speech. We got a disciplined message, to your point, we got a disciplined message, and in this next stop, we're going to tweak it this way. We are going to telegraph that we're going to tweak it this way. Or to CTV, just want to let you guys know there's going to be 2 new paragraphs. This is kind of what it's going to be. We're going to go on healthcare, we got a new proposal, right? Put that in there, get the PM to no, just change those 2 paragraphs. We don't want to screw with anything else. You get those 2 paragraphs in there, you get them written in the way you want, so you know that everything else is gray, that's color, it's going to land, boom, drives the news, and you get people to react to you. So that's the first job. The second job is just working the media, talking with the media, how are they feeling, what is going on, what are they angry with us about, are they chewing on us or are they chewing on them? And it's a very simple proposition. Get the media to chew on them, not chew on us. I mean, the rule in the 2004-2006 campaign, and I think often the rule in election campaigns, is that people are so dispirited with politicians and politics.
In 2004, this was the case.
People hated us.
When people were thinking about Harper, they were voting for us.
Right.
And when people were thinking about us, they were voting for Harper.
That's exactly what I was going to say. That's what I was going to say. So our mission with media wasn't to get them to say what we wanted them to say. It was just to make the focus on Harper. Because if people were focused on Harper, then that benefited us. But if people were focused on us, then it was our cell count that was going down.
Jenni, what's the story behind the last week of that campaign from the Conservative perspective? Very odd week.
04?
Yeah.
Well,
didn't you guys start driving on buses in rural Alberta with 9 days left or something like that?
Yeah, the cavalry from Edmonton to Calgary.
It was such a strange last week.
Yeah, listen, I'm not saying that. I was fairly junior in the 04 campaign. I was the Ontario desk, which we picked up 24 seats from you guys. So I'll just do a kudos on that. I think the last week was the last week.
Jenni's regular plug for the Chrétien Liberals.
I usually start it with talking about the juggernaut. No, listen, I think that probably the number one in postmortem of 2004 that we talked about was the fact that we ended the last 2 days going from Edmonton to Calgary on whistle stops in Red Deer and Lacombe and Ponoka, all towns in Alberta that the Reform Party and the Canadian Alliance before that had won with 80% of the vote. So, of course, there were changes made going into the 06 campaign where that wasn't. Was the logic,
though, honest to Pete, because I don't think we've actually ever talked about this in detail, was the logic that we're locked in, it's going okay, so what we want to do now is just keep it still? Was there just a misread? We thought we were winning and you thought you were losing.
In the arena on election night. I believe they believed they were winning.
I'm not sure they believed they were winning. I'll be honest. I was so focused on Ontario that I'm not sure that's the case. I think that I'm not sure there was much more thought given. 2004 was a good result. We held you guys to a minority. It was. I make fun of you guys, but it was 8 months before or a year before where Bono and his bump.
I know, it all seemed it was going to be better.
So anyways, but there were a lot of changes and a lot of
Scott's fault.
And a lot of planning that happened.
That would have been the difference.
And a lot of planning that happened between 04 and 06. So.
Well, listen, I got to say that it is a complete and utter outrage that I have been commenting on this election campaign at all, much less being critical of anybody else's campaign efforts, because 4 years ago, my Liberal-led campaign culminated with me asking the leader of our party to go and make a statement that she would not be the leader of the party after the election, no matter what the result was. We made her take all of the blame for all of that with a week to go, just to try to salvage something out of it. That is the worst last week I've ever had. I've ever had.
Explicit, right? With a week to go, the premier of the province holds a press conference in a playground and says, "We have lost. I will not be premier. I'm asking you, since that question is no longer in play, to focus on voting with your hearts." And our bet was, your bet, David, was that was the best way to regain votes and save seats.
It would allow some people to come back, maybe save some seats, maybe save some votes. But it all started with a desperate gamble that failed horribly. So going to the campaign, I think we have not much chance to win in 2018. And the only chance we have to win is to, I think, take down this Ford newcomer who seems to have lots of vulnerabilities. And so we went into the campaign probably 5 points ahead of the NDP. And that margin had been narrowing as the campaign approached. And we had a negative advertising campaign against Ford combined with an earned media campaign against Ford by our war room. It was research tested. We knew it would work. And we put it out there, and it drove a lot of votes away from Ford, and they went to the New Democrats. And immediately put the New Democrats in second place, combined with some attrition of our vote to the NDP following the City TV debate. Yeah. And once we were in third, it was absolutely over. Then that narrative was cast in stone. There was no breaking it, and it took us to that last week. But that whole entire writ period is a gruesome, gruesome experience. But the last week, you can't imagine what it's like to go and sit down in Kathleen's living room and tell her, for the sake of the party, this is what we think you have to do.
Well, I can. It was awful. Just for people that are involved in politics or interested in politics, the decision to ask the premier to acknowledge, to concede that she was going to lose the campaign wasn't just unusual. Like, it was virtually unprecedented, right? And by the way, I will argue to people until like the last beer is poured that it did save those 7 seats, that there would have been 0 seats until that point. So I think that David made the right call, as unconventional and courageous and horrifying as it was. But it was a hugely divisive thing to do within the campaign also. One of the senior people in the campaign started passing around that YouTube clip from the Dodgeball movie where Jason Bateman says, "Ooh, they've decided to forfeit. Bold strategy." So we got a lot of pushback. But I think it was, David, I think it was the best available door to walk through when all the other doors, like, there was nothing but, tigers and spikes on the other side of. So it was, but that was a grim thing. And the premier, the fucking hardship that placed on her, like the burden she had to carry, that was a hard time. Writing those remarks, watching her give those remarks, watching the response at headquarters when she gave those remarks, fetching the calls from candidates in response to those remarks, like that was a savage, searing time. That was way worse in 2006, a million times worse in 2006, when we lost federal government. For
what did you think when you watched it?
I'm gonna have to say for me, in the war room, we were not all that surprised. It seemed like somewhat of a Hail Mary pass that you guys were doing.
It was.
But we were, that stage of the campaign, we were feeling pretty good. Our polling was good. Our voter ID was really good. Our reports on the field were very good. And so it wasn't going to end up being, it wasn't going to be anything that was going to end up affecting, I think, our campaign at that point.
Right. So the timer tells me that we've used up our allotted time. Scott, what's your blessing or curse?
Well, my curse is on the Liberal campaign. I'm sorry, I'm such a broken record on this, but I just think the campaign needed to go negative. It needed to go hard at Ford right off the top. It needed to establish that there was a case for change, and that hasn't happened. And it really, I find it dispiriting. And I kind of feel, as I watch this last couple of days, I look at the Liberal. I look at the Liberal tour stops, I look at the Liberal message, and I look at the NDP message, and I think, yes, yeah, right? Like maybe execute it a little bit differently, maybe round it out in a way that I would do differently. But like, yeah, now, but it's 8 days to go, and you sort of go like, were they in a place where they go, well, I'm not going to go there, and now they've only convinced themselves to go there, and so I curse all campaigns that sort of say, I'll wait until I need to do this thing before I do this thing, because by the time you decide you need to do it, it's too late. You actually had to do it before, and that's, I think, where the opponents of Doug Ford are now, and the goddamn guy, as my mother would say, is going to be the next Premier of Ontario again.
Hey, Jenny, I didn't tell you. I'm wearing Guido Fleur socks.
Oh.
Yeah.
Les Démons Blancs.
My cousin Adam at the back is a huge Habs fan and loves Guy Lafleur. Wave at him.
Hey, Adam.
Good looking man, Adam.
Jenny, you got a blessing or a curse for us?
Well, listen, my blessing is actually going to go to my friends in the front row here. Keep disciplined. Don't listen to the fucking media, which I know you haven't been listening to. Keep getting your vote out, and everything looks good. So keep up what you're doing.
All right, my blessing goes out to the Liberal campaign, which is 8 days remains a long time in politics, remains a long time in a campaign. And I have seen things move in the last 8 days of a campaign. I've done things to move things in the last 8 days of a campaign. I've put ads on the air. I've seen other people do the same thing. It is not too late to take Scott Reid's advice and bring the fucking heat. Okay?
Yeah.
That is my blessing. All right. I'm sorry about that. Thank you.
Days in May. Wasn't that pretty sure that was a pretty cool
You know what they call that? Scattered applause.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned me, so that didn't help.
I was hoping that's
I
what.
love the negative to positive sandwich of blessing and curse. Curse to blessing. So first question, we've been talking a lot, or listening to you guys talk a lot about silver medals and the bronze medal. It seems like the gold medal may be baked, but for small and medium-sized businesses, who do they want to win the silver? And then who does the Ford campaign want to win the silver or bronze? So those are the two questions, and then we can go out to questions from the audience.
Well, listen, I think that in terms of small and medium-sized business, you're going to want to vote for the Conservatives. I'm not sure if it matters whether the NDP or the Liberals are in first or second. Their policies in terms of businesses are pretty much the same. In terms of opposition, I'm not sure it matters. I think you're looking at two opposition parties that, if they don't win this time, it's going to be tough. If Stephen Del Duca, if he loses his seat, which a lot of the polls have said that it looks like he is, I'm not sure how he can stay on in the Liberal Party. And if you're Andrea Horwath, this is your fourth kick of the can? So
77th, actually.
77th
campaign. Yeah.
I'm not sure how you stay on. So I think if you're the Conservatives, I think if you're looking at things, you're looking at potentially two opposition parties, regardless of who comes in, silver or bronze, that are going to be looking at having new leaders in the next election.
I'm going to quote Herb Gray and Jason Kenney and say I dispute the premise of the question, which is to say it's astonishing, really, how little discussion there's been of the economy in this election campaign. There's been discussion of economic impacts, affordability, how can we make this piece of life easier for you? But I had on the Herle, I had Peter Weltman, the Financial Accountability Officer. His projections show less than 2% growth in Ontario for as far as the eye can see, which is not enough to sustain the lifestyle we have, much less to create a better lifestyle. And there's been no discussion of that in the campaign whatsoever from any of the parties. And I don't detect an economic growth plan out of anybody. If I cared about business and economic growth, I don't know who I'd vote for in this campaign.
Jesus, what a downer. Well, my 24-year-old son is here, so lots of luck. You're gonna be eating beans from a can for the next 60 years. I'll answer it less confrontationally than David. I think if you're looking for because you're like, oh, nobody's any good on the economy. They all stink. You're being mean, I think. I think
Okay,
they're all
I'm the mean guy.
I don't know if
He actually just said
remember.
All
he
right,
was
well, tell
talking
us about the
it.
NDP platform.
Well, because I mentioned these people are well intended. I think if you assume that Ford's going to win the election, and you're concerned from a small business, medium-sized business lobby, you want the Liberals to come second. And the reason you want them to come second is that they're probably more likely to win the next election. If, as Jenny says, there's going to be an alternation, governments don't get re-elected forever and ever. And I also think they'll be willing to scramble. They'll be more likely to say, all right.
You can't trust the Liberals with small business. They might bring in a $15 minimum wage.
There you go. They'll reassemble their policy platform in order to be more appealing.
Yeah.
And a $15 wage is good for everybody. So that's where I would go. I would say you want to put. But the even more practical answer, to be honest, is play futures. Who do you think is most likely to win the next election if it isn't the Conservatives? I think it's probably the Liberals, and therefore you'd want them because you want to influence them.
All right, are there any questions from the crowd?
Oh, my.
We've got one up front, sorry, oh, great.
Oh, see, my son wants to follow up on the 2% thing, David.
Hi all, my name's Kelly, if you don't know me already. Got a quick question. I spent most of the last couple of years in Alberta where politics is easy and simple and harmonious. So, especially right now. So I got a really quick question for you, and I only want to ask it because of the way you started, and you were talking about the Liberal brand. And it is a powerful brand. So why in the actual did Stephen Del Duca say, let's change our logo before the start of the campaign?
I'm going to leave it to these guys.
Sorry. I mean, I'm sure they wanted to appear different from the previous regime. That would have been their intent, was to appear symbolically and therefore visually different from the Kathleen Wynne regime. They knew that the Ford people were going to run after Wynne more than they were frankly running after Del Duca. They have introduced the phrase Wynne Del Duca into the lexicon of Ontario. And so they would have been looking to refresh the look in some way, to present a different image in a way. And I don't think that the logo change is the reason why they've been unable to capitalize on their brand. I think the fact that the Trudeau government is complicit with the Ford government's re-election is the reason they've had trouble capitalizing on the brand. You can't find a thing that Justin Trudeau has said about the Liberals in this election campaign, and right up until election day, they were cutting favorable deals with them. I think they've allowed Ford to co-opt a lot of that, and what we see is that 1/4 of the people that voted for Justin Trudeau in the federal election in Ontario were voting for Doug Ford.
But that's not
It's not a logo issue.
But that's a question then that you Liberals should ask Justin Trudeau.
I am asking him right now.
And he's right behind that door, David, so here's your chance. I think two things, real quick. One, it was the right decision to change the logo for all the reasons that David said. I mean, Jesus Christ, we took the thing over the cliff, so you want to change and signal change.
But it wasn't a very good change. I don't think the new logo is that particularly interesting, and that's, who cares? That's one person's opinion. The second thing gets at your question, though, which is that if I was going to change the Liberal brand in Ontario, I would change it to the federal Liberal brand. I would make the logo look like the federal Liberal logo. I would say, let's suck some of its energy. Let's borrow some of it. It's okay, Corey. We haven't mentioned you enough. It's good. Break a glass. And all eyes will dart to you again. Somebody's going to chair the end of the day call. You're going to be thinking of that. Fine. So that's our answer.
We have a hand over here.
Hi there, Arthur Lofsky.
Hey, Arthur.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
I love Supertramp. Why do you hate Meatloaf so much, David? No, okay.
Yes,
no, this is
David, yes.
there-
Why do you fucking...
Oh, man,
Okay,
I
the real
could use up
question.
a lot of time on that.
the real question. The media.
Yeah.
What the hell is going on with the bloody media, other than Sean O'Shea, who came out swinging, not necessarily because of who it was.
What, came out swinging and asked irrelevant questions that
No,
no one
no,
gives
that's
a
not
fuck
the point.
about?
That's not the point.
Oh, well, you don't give a fuck about
No, that's
them,
not the
but-
point. At these press conferences for the premier, they are so timid. They are not asking lots of questions, and they are seemingly docile and laying back, despite what some would consider a peekaboo campaign. I understand the peekaboo campaign, but why aren't the media saying more and doing more?
I saw Colin DeMello walk in here. Does he want to take this?
And you had to write like 16 Twitter threads about it, right?
Well,
So,
Scott,
I don't think it
Scott
was-
Reid, in addition to being our NDP representative on the panel, is also our media guy. So go.
Look, I think the answer is obvious, to be blunt. I think media are really in a conflicted spot these days. Media is among the many institutions that are under constant scrutiny and pushback and open attack. And so I think, that balancing between challenging a campaign with questions, but not taking it to the extent where you make yourself the issue, it's really awkward. And you're going to get challenged on that. So I think news organizations are sort of struggling to find that balance. And, and they don't have the hand they used to. Right? 20 years ago, the Parliamentary Press Gallery, the Ontario Press Gallery, Queen's Park Press Gallery, would say, sorry, no fucking way, not cool. And campaigns and political parties would change their practices. Now, they don't have that hand. So I'm a little more sympathetic, even though I get frustrated myself, I'm a little more sympathetic to the media. It's not easy to do this job right now in a world where most people are getting their news off of, Cousin Earl's YouTube channel.
There's still a special pox on Martin Redcon's house for that piece.
Well, that was particularly like, hey,
Yeah.
you've evolved. Wait a minute. I'm not saying you said you've evolved, so I'll say you've evolved. So you've evolved. We're both evolving together right now, hand in hand.
We have
Yeah,
5
it
more
was like
questions,
Must
or
Love
sorry,
Dogs. It was a
5 more
rom-com.
minutes. Sorry, Scott, 5 more minutes.
Sorry, I'm just going to keep
3
talking.
more questions.
Till
So we have to do rapid
Someone
fire.
brings me a beer.
Corey.
Oh, shit.
Oh, wait, you gave it
I don't want to make
How
it.
come I'm so fantastic? And please make it about Saskatchewan.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to make any news. I'm not going to ask you about the race. But I did want, if I was going to ask a question, it was going to be about the decision made last campaign to have Wynne say that she wasn't going to run again. And you already addressed it. But I just wanted to contribute one point, which is we were doing a lot of tracking polling at the time, and you guys weren't. And you were sitting at 2 seats before you did that. And it absolutely was the right decision to do in terms of what you were trying to do. But I also think it's one of the bravest political decisions I've ever seen somebody take. Very difficult. But, from our perspective, it absolutely worked.
Thanks,
I was
man.
The credit for that courage goes to Kathleen.
No,
She's the one who had to do it.
I had a lot of courage.
I mean, you were pretty.
I had a lot of courage.
You were right behind her, Balder the Brave. You bet.
Yeah.
You have to pick, Lindsay. We're too meek.
My name is Alex.
Alex.
So yesterday I turned 33, and to nobody's shock, the number one issue to me is housing. It seems to be the Achilles heel of this government. If you look at any publicly available data on polling, but it seems that the opposition can't get a grip on this issue, and I can think of a dozen reasons. I'm not going to give you those reasons because I'd like to hear your reasons, but one of them is that in a lack of a brokerage politic era, you're running on such thin margins in terms of winning or not winning a seat that you don't want to upset your local councillor or your local mayor, and since housing is a local issue, you don't want to really upturn the apple cart, and it kind of spills out to, well, maybe you don't have a whole lot of credibility on this issue by the way you're talking about it. So I'm just, what are your thoughts on this issue, and why are the opposition parties struggling so much with it?
Well, first of all, I'll start with a disclaimer. No matter what I say, I am not in any way in disagreement with the original sponsor of our podcast, the Ontario Real Estate Association.
And if you're thinking of purchasing a home, you really do need the expert advice of a registered agent.
I think it's a really difficult issue politically for a few reasons. One of which is it seems most of the levers lie at the municipal level, not at the provincial level. And people, maybe for that reason, aren't really blaming the provincial government. It's a huge issue. I don't think people know who's supposed to fix it or whose fault it is. It's not obvious it's the provincial government's fault. And it's such a complicated issue. I had 4 relatively political experts on my podcast. Hi. 4 relatively political experts on the housing issue on my podcast, the Herle Burley. And at the end of it, I was completely convinced that nothing would happen on this file because there were too many moving parts and there were too many disputed interests and there were too many jurisdictions involved. And all of that just makes it terrible for a political campaign. Like, there's no clean message you can have about this. There's nothing you can promise at the end of the day that you will deliver out of it. It just doesn't lend itself to politics. And I think you're going to have to hope that despite the fact that it not being an issue in the election campaign, that it is an issue for government. I don't know, you guys got anything to add to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, political blame and credit. Not clear you're going to get credit for a policy that's better.
Anything else? No.
We have one more question.
One
there in
last
the middle.
question right here. Oh, is there a middle too?
So I'm thinking I'm maybe one of the only people that came in here from Montreal, so maybe one of the only Quebecers here. But I wanted to ask a question more in regards to outside of the Ontario political realm and more about the federal realm. And I don't want to put Jenny in a difficult position because you're working in Pierre's campaign.
No, but it seems like you're about to.
I don't know.
Go ahead. Oh, go ahead.
Go out of my way not to, but just because of the recent, today, the Justice Minister David Lametti came out saying that probably going to be a challenge on Bill 21, probably going to be a challenge on Bill 96. I think there's a huge disconnect between the rest of Canada and the opinion of Quebecers on this issue. It's a vastly popular bill. Doesn't mean that's my opinion, doesn't mean I support the bills, but I'm just saying, you look at opinion polling from every major pollster, they're very, 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 their bills are supported by Quebecers by and large. I think Pierre's done a very good job in terms of being able to play to the Quebec audience. I say this as a former advisor in a Quebec Liberal government. He's very impressive. And I used to say that Jean Charest was one of the best politicians in the world, somebody who makes you feel like the most important person when he's speaking to you for that 5 minutes he's speaking to you. My question to you in this case, how do you see this playing out? If there's a challenge from Trudeau towards this, Bill 21 and 96, how do you see Patrick Brown making this a huge, one of his biggest issues in the leadership race? You see Scott Aitchison making it a big issue like this. Jenny, I'd like to hear from you a little bit, and if your colleagues would like to jump in as well.
Well, listen, I've actually been pretty open in terms of what I think about Bill 21. In terms of, you're right, the Liberals did announce today on the eve of our Quebec debate, that's going to start in, I don't know, 3 hours, that they would issue a Supreme Court challenge, which is something they could have been able to say for for years going forward. So Pierre has been very forceful. If you're asking me about Pierre, if that's what you're obviously asking me about, I appreciate you coming from Quebec for the Ontario election panel to ask me about conservative leadership politics. So if you're asking me about that, Pierre's been very clear that he does not support Bill 21. He would not vote for it. He would not support it federally. He thinks it's egregious, and he hopes that the government of Quebec backs down on doing it.
Okay, our panelists need another drink. So last question.
Check out Brigitte Legault on the Herle Burley.
Yeah.
Francois Legault's chief organizer.
He's a persuasive, important person.
Mark Smithies, huge fan. Thank you guys for being here. It's been a ton of fun. Fiscal conservatism, balancing budgets, responsible spending has been...
Sorry, what? Your mic went out.
Yeah. Right? Has been completely abandoned. The Liberals abandoned it last time. The Conservatives abandoned it this time. Why is it such an unpopular place to go?
Well, I don't think it's, listen, I don't think it's going to be. I think that COVID changed the entire world in terms of how governments acted in terms of financial, how they handled things financially. I think we're seeing a change in that, and we're seeing that with kind of the positions that federal governments have done. You look at administrations in the U.S., you look at the Trudeau administration here in terms of printing money is causing high levels of inflation, which high levels of inflation are going to lead to high levels of interest rates. To your point of asking about being able to buy a house, it's your friends that actually have bought a house are going to have problems keeping their house because of the levels of interest rates that are going to go up. And so it's going to have a absolute cascading effect. And just like my friends who came into government in 1993, and they worked for Prime Minister Martin. And I would like to say I'm jealous. I doubt I'll ever work for, I never worked for a prime minister who had such budget cuts to things like the CBC that the chair of the CBC quit based on the decisions that you guys made. And so I think you're going to see probably around the world, there are going to be very tough decisions that governments are going to have to make leading into the next couple of years.
People have never cared about deficits. Most people never care about the government deficits. They say they do, kind of, because that's obviously the correct response. But they prioritize either tax cuts or spending in their pet areas over that always. And there was a very brief exception to that rule in the 1990s when a combination of economic events, international media events, and the zeitgeist of neoliberalism came together to make balanced budgets something that the public cared about, only for a few years. The political consensus around balanced budgets in Canada lasted much longer than that. But what we understood in the Trudeau campaign going into 2015 was that that political consensus was no longer based on public demand, as it had been in 1995. That the public underpinning of the political consensus had disappeared. And it has disappeared, and it won't reappear until there's a crisis related to the deficit. The reason people cared about it suddenly in 1995 was because we had a horrible recession at the beginning of the 1990s. It was considered to be the first made-in-Canada recession that wasn't led by the United States. We had our own recession. And international agencies and newspapers were calling us a basket case. That brief constellation of events caused a consensus around balanced budgets. They're not a political winner. I mean, except that you need to say you want to do it.
Yes.
You need to say you want to do it. If you appear not to care about it, then you're a spendthrift, and then you're not to be trusted. But as long as you have a path to balance, and that path could be 3 years or 5 years or 10 years, or I don't give a shit, right? As long as you have a path to balance, that's all you need these days.
And I would add one small thing to that. I agree 1,000% with David, and you'll hear everybody pay lip service to balanced budgets because it is, you know, kind of table stakes and a path to balance and all that sort of stuff. But I do think that economic issues are going to dominate our politics and our thinking over the course of the next number of years. And it will only be if someone persuades the Canadian public that economic recovery and economic well-being are at risk because of deficits, that people will pay attention to deficits. But absent that, it will continue to be something that people sort of in 1977-ish ways nod their heads at as they drive past and throw cash out the window.
I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our original sponsor, Aurea, for their support in making this month-long set of pods on the Ontario election possible.